Hello, everybody. So here we are talking with Peter and Robert about feedback systems in family therapy. And for us to be on the same page, just let me tell you what I understand by this, what these feedback informed interventions are. So basically, I would say this is a auxiliarity tool to inform the therapist and to inform eventually the client about the progress that is taking place, usually on a session by session basis. So basically how it goes. Before each session, for instance, we can ask the patient to fill in some brief self-record measures, and their responses and their scores are used in real time, because we can see if things are better or worse and adjust intervention. So basically, we collect data not about the progress, not inside the session, but outside. And then we inform, so we feedback to the therapist and eventually to the client about this progress. The formats of this feedback can be very different. For instance, it can be simply using pen and paper. So people just fill in and we take a look at it and we see how things are going, if the person is depressed or not, comparing with the previous session, etc. But there's also this possibility of having electronic systems that help us coding and treating the scores. So we can see, for instance, graphs of the progress, so I quickly see the clinical progress of clients. So there are now several systems. Some of them we start to have it also for family therapy, and therapists can use it as I said, as an auxiliary tool for the sessions. My first question, and I'm working in this area. I do research, and I've tried to use, and sometimes I use feedback systems like this. But I have a critical position regarding this. So that I'm not sure, and it would be nice to have your opinion. Do we really need these kind of systems? Do we really need feedback systems in order to evaluate the progress of our clients in family therapy? Can't we just do it inside the session?
I'm not sure if we really need it, but I think it's useful. It can be useful. I use it all the time, in the sense that I invite all my clients to use to give feedback in a systematic way, and not all my clients like it, and then if they don't like it, we don't start with it, but I invite them all. And for me, it's easier if they give me feedback. My work becomes easier. So
how do you do it? It's immediately before the session that you ask them to fill in these questionnaires?
I ask them by the end of the session.
Okay.
So I ask them about 10 minutes before the end of the session. I will distribute, but it's more than just administrating questionnaires. Working in a feedback oriented way, it takes a lot of preparation with the family. And so it's not just a moment of the filling out of the questionnaires that's important. There are a lot of important things before that. So for me, the real challenge of working in a system with a system of feedback is creating a feedback culture before you use the questionnaires. And then after, when you get the feedback from the clients, how to use it constructively. And these are two. So before the filling out of the questionnaires and afterwards, these are the most important and more difficult moments of using feedback instruments, I think.
Because there are some therapists that, for instance, use it for themselves, so they see how it goes, but they do not discuss it with the clients. Whereas there are other ways of working where the outcomes are analyzed together, and so that's a dialogue regarding that, right?
For me, it's also our feedback systems of feedback instruments are not used for outcome feedback. They are really only process feedback. So they are really meant for family members to give us some sense about how they feel in the session, how they experience the session. So we don't do outcome feedback. You can add some instruments for outcome feedback if you want to, but according to us, process feedback is more important. It's more important because it is more useful to orient the therapy, and also because you learn much more as a therapist. Also in the long run, as a therapist, you can develop much more because you get specific feedback about you in the session, not about the outcome of the therapy. No, about how people experience you. And so this is really an important tool for therapists to learn and to become more effective as therapists. So it's for me, it's not at all about outcome. Although even if you ask process feedback, sometimes they give they will give you feedback about outcome. They will say that they feel less depressed, or that their child has less worries about eating and so on. And so sometimes you get some feedback about outcome, but the main focus of our feedback instruments is how do you feel in the session? Do you feel understood? What was meaningful for you in the session, and so on?
That is interesting. I've developed one feedback system because I needed a more simple way of analyzing data, and I've also used process and combined with outcome, but ideographic. So not a nomothetic measure, but the problems of each person. So what bothers the person, and then to what extent that is the person is feeling better or not, but on the personal problems. But also that process, the feedback on what was helpful for me, what was hindering for me in this session. This is really interesting, and in family therapy even more interesting, I think, because of the differences between the family members.
Yes.
Right. I don't know, Robert, if you have also this experience.
Yeah, I thought back about the question you were asking, also about doing it in using a feedback system, or do it more structurally. I realized that feedback is always there. Huh? So when I do family therapy, I realize that also when a father, for example, moves his chair a little bit backwards, or one of the children is closing his eyes or something, that's also feedback. So for me, feedback is also something very common. It's there in communication, and we make interpretations all the time about how do we relate towards each other. Are we productive? Are we making something that is useful or that matters? And so it's already there. That's very important for me. And of course, it's also important, and I think a lot of family therapists do that we meta communicate, that we communicate about the communication. But to do it in a structural way, to do it every session, I believe it made me a better therapist. I was always curious when I see families in my therapy practice, in the room where I work. I'm always curious when they are going back home and they sit in their car and they talk to each other and they talk about the therapy. I always think that's the most important part of the session. And I want to invite them to talk about that in my therapy practice or in conversation with me. And I think I, as a therapist, have a responsibility to invite, and if people don't want it or don't want to use it, it's also fine for me. But I think that I have learned to become a better therapist by doing this in a structural way. So you create this. Peter was also talking about it. You create this culture of feedback, and that's helpful. I want to learn from the family members how I can become a good enough therapist for them in their situation. Yeah.
Sorry.
Maybe also when you talk about that, because there's a lot of asking for feedback in individual therapy, sometimes it's easier because that's what you're also referring to right now. And when you work with families or communities, you work with a lot of people. And for me, it's also important to use the questionnaires. The questionnaires are not that important. They are a way of measuring or making a difference, and then they are an entrance to have a conversation about it. And I really prefer to talk with all the members of the family or the community about how do we collaborate together as an effective team. So we evaluate all the relations in the system. Yeah.
So you also give much importance to the feedback on the process, so on the experiences, how people feel and what was helpful for them, and combine all the views of the family members regarding the session.
Yeah, in the research that I do, and we call it collaborative practice-based research, I also use some outcome measurements. So I also use routine outcome measurements. But for me, the numbers are not so interesting. What's more interesting is that we have a conversation about how are we collaborating together? Are we an effective team? Are we working towards the goals that this family prefers? And the most important thing is that asking for feedback is one thing, but what do we decide? What do we decide to do differently because of the feedback? That's for me the most important thing, and that's more a qualitative question, and that's more qualitative research, I think.
Yeah, that is very interesting because, in fact, the mode that you both use, feedback, is really to build inside the session a new orientation, or building with the family new ways of conducting collaboratively the therapeutic process, right? So. And that is perhaps for you both one of the most important components, is that it is an auxiliary tool for engaging people in deciding where to go with you.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And in fact, also where to go with each other, because the alliance, it's all about the alliance, about optimizing the alliance. And the alliance is complex, especially in family therapy. And so it's not only about my relationship as a therapist with each of the family members, which is very important, but it's also the relationship between the family members. So in the feedback that they give to me, they also give feedback to each other about their experience in therapy. And in the feedback instruments that we use, we have 5 questions. It's not a long instrument, but the 2 last questions are very often used by the family members to give feedback to each other, not to me. They give the feedback, they fill out the question, they give it to me, but they know that we will talk about it. And in the feedback instrument, they give messages to each other. And so it's not only optimizing the relationship with the therapist, but also optimizing the relationship with each other, and sometimes telling the others in the family, I was moved by this meant a lot to me, this is the first time that I see you crying, and so on and so on. All important messages between them.
Very interesting. I would like to raise one question that is regarding the confidentiality issues that might take place when we use a feedback system. Namely, for instance, when it is not about the experiences in the session, because that everybody was there, so it's not a secret, But for instance, when we are using outcome measures that contain personal idiographic items, like personal goals or personal problems, it might that are constructed, that are built up in individual settings. For instance, I use the personal questionnaire that is a list of problems that the person wants to change in therapy, and some of them are complaints regarding the other family members, but people don't want to share it. So there is a network of problems. Some of them are personal, and this may raise confidentiality issues. For instance, a husband that comes and he has an extra conjugal relationship, and he tells that that is one problem for him, but he doesn't want the wife to know about it. So we cannot comment on this progress on this item inside the session to everybody. I don't know if from your experience these issues, confidentiality issues or other ethical issues came out using these feedback systems.
Maybe for me, I mostly work with the whole system. So I mostly work with families, with parents and children together. So and sometimes we separate more the subsystems. So I talk with the parents, especially sometimes when it's about their relationship, for example, and it's good to make this distinguish. But most often I work with the whole family, and the feedback forms that I use, I work with outcome rating scale and the session rating scale from Scott Miller. They don't ask a lot of content. There's not so much information asked. What I usually do is that we have the family goals rating list, and we have routine outcome measurements, and we have the OLS and SOS. And in every 3 or 4 sessions, everybody's together. Then we need the collective, and then we and we ask also always consent to share this information together. And then every 3 or 4 sessions, we put all the papers on the table, and then we discuss and we have a conversation about how can we collaborate in a different way to achieve your preferred goals. And this conversation is audio taped, and we listen to that with sometimes with peers or with other therapists in supervision groups, for example. And then this supervision group writes a letter, or we make a recording, and we bring that back to the family. So there's another feedback loop. But of course, to do that, we need consent. So we call it collaborative practice-based research, and we ask consent about what can we share, what can't we share. So it's always part of the conversation. But because we work so much with collectives, with the group, and the question is really about how do we become an effective team together. It is often not a problem, but of course it should be part of the discussion.
Very, very interesting. Yes, I would like to do family therapy, to be your client. I would like to work that way. Thank you. And Peter.
Also for the way that we work, it's not, we also work with families, and in principle, we don't do individual sessions. It's also very clear from the beginning that the feedback instruments are meant to be talked about afterwards. So it's very clear that it's not used to have a private channel with the therapist or something, and clients don't use it in that way. So I don't see a lot of ethical problems. Well, not anything new. It's just typical problems of doing family therapy. So it's not very special to have it. No, they know that we're going to talk about, and of course they don't share everything, but that's okay. That's in the session they don't verbally share everything, and in the questionnaires they also don't share everything. That's okay. So we work with what they want to share.
Yes.
So,
So in a way, it will be different how we manage information if the feedback is using an individual tool rather than a group, family group tool, right? And that is something that should be planned from the beginning, and the rules must be clear in that sense. If we are going to talk about it in front of everybody or not. Yeah, from my side, the fact that using these individualized outcome measures that are unique for each person, that are personal, has the advantage of getting to know all these aspects. For instance, this husband that has got for 3 years an extramarital relationship, and the couple comes to therapy for couple session, for couple therapy, right? So having this information is very useful for the therapist, and it would not appear if this tool is of this family group format. It comes because it is gathered in an individual setting before family therapy starting, and it is clear there that it is confidential what is said, that we are not going to say to other family members what is said there. So in a way, the therapist has got a view eventually of secrets and discrepancies, what he knows and that she doesn't, etc. And this is very relevant, useful information to plan the intervention. But it is clear that the therapist cannot comment on that during the sessions.
For me, I don't experience that kind of information as useful. So I don't want to know if it's not an issue, if it cannot be talked about in the session. I rather not know. So for me, it's burdening my work if I would know something, like for instance, the husband has an extramarital affair and I cannot talk about it. So I don't want to know. And usually, of course, I work a lot with family secrets. Usually you don't. In my way of working, I don't know what is the secret, but I sense that there is a secret. And then what you can do is you can talk about secrecy without knowing what the secret is about. And so you can work around secrets without having this information about what the secret is about.
Yes.
And that's interesting. And I remain free to move between the two partners or between the different family members. I am not stuck with the secret that maybe makes my work much more difficult. So I prefer not to know if I cannot talk about it.
Robert, I don't know if you have any idea regarding this.
Yeah, because for me it is the same. I rather not know, but I also experienced sometimes that accidentally I got some information, and then for me, because I am a couple and family therapist, for me the most important question is how can I understand or help me to understand what makes it so difficult to talk about this within your family or within your relationship, because it's never addressed to me. Often these emotions or experiences or stories are meant for people in the family system. So I'd rather then ask from what makes it difficult to talk about, and can I and what can be shared, or what do you need from the others to share it, and maybe I can support you and help you doing that, or helping the others in achieving it in an appreciative and caring way. So my focus is, as a systemic family therapist, is always the relationship itself, and not the persons within the system. The focus is the communication and the relationship itself.
Yes, yes, it's so nice. I was not expecting, but I finished this interview with this blood. I should write the paper, sharing this what we gain, but also the possibilities of getting stuck with this kind of feedback and using these individual feedback sources in in the family, you see, because you know, they know that you know, but we don't share. But because we see where the communication between family members is not clear and is not happening, we can use that information to work precisely on that difficulties that we know, and they know that we know. So it's well, I think we have to stop today, but I suppose I did enjoy very much, and I suppose that therapists that are watching this video might be now curious to take a look at it, these feedback systems. And well, I hope we can continue rather working or talking about this topic. For me, it's really interesting, and I've learned with this these few minutes that we had here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
And also thank you, Robert.
Yeah, bye bye, Peter.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.